Let me send up today's presenter, Nella Young, to get us started. Nella?
Thanks, Donna, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. My name is Nella Young, the Design Leadership Program Director at Enterprise Community Partners, and our goal today is to introduce the Climate and Cultural Resilience Grant Program to help you feel a little bit more prepared and excited to apply for this program, and to make sure you know that there is a team of friendly people to reach out to with any questions you have. Before I start, I just want to introduce a few other people joining me today to answer your questions on this call and share some examples. We have Sarah Torcell, who can answer questions about the grant requirements, and also has a depth of experience in our rural and Native American programs. We're also joined by Thomas Lee and Lori Schumann, who have expertise in creating sustainable buildings and neighborhoods, as well as in disaster readiness and response. And finally, Tim Devins on the team from Global Green, who is one of the consultants working with us on this project. He's also available to share some specific project examples and inspiration. I'm going to share an overview of the Climate and Cultural Resilience Program, giving you some of the context and purpose for the program and give a little overview of the terminology we're using. And then highlight some specifics of the RFP to orient you to it and share a few examples to help you understand the kinds of projects we're looking to support. And we'll open up for questions. So our resilience work at Enterprise has been growing. We've really responded to an increasing frequency of heat waves, droughts, floods, increasing risks to people, homes, and infrastructure. The 2011 and 2013, the U.S. experienced 32 other events that each caused at least $1 billion in damages, and 2/3 of counties nationwide had presidentially declared disasters. And of the things we know and are particularly cognizant of here at Enterprise is that low-income communities are in the front lines of this damage, and they continue to be the most vulnerable. In at-risk communities before disaster strikes is one of the most cost-effective ways to protect residents and property while also strengthening their ability to weather severe storms. Enterprise's Resilient Communities Initiative seeks to strengthen communities and residents so they're better prepared for and able to respond to extreme weather events and other kinds of emergencies they may face. So that's a little bit of the framing of our work to date at Enterprise, but it's also really important to understand that the core of this program is really focused on building community resilience and cultural resilience. So to date, much of our work has focused on the built environment, but we also know, and research has shown, that this is not the only factor in community resilience. In fact, Daniel P. Aldrich, who's a researcher and professor out of Northeastern University, he did some research in Japan after the earthquake and tsunami several years ago. And one of the findings was that in communities with stronger social networks, fewer people died. So it really demonstrated that programs that build resilience are most successful when they're bottom-up and community-driven. Strong actions help people in crises by offering mutual aid, enabling collective action, enabling individuals to make better decisions together. And in his research, he highlights some of the creative placemaking strategies that have been effective in building some of these strong connections and this cultural resilience. So the Cultural Resilience Program intended to increase both climate resilience aspects and the cultural resilience, really building human networks in order to support communities' ability to withstand dramatic weather events and other kinds of challenges they may face. So we harness the power of local culture in achieving that goal. This program is going to support organizations to use creative placemaking as a strategy for social cohesion in the context of a climate resilience challenge. So a lot of things coming together, but one of the things that we're trying to do through this program is to say that, creative placemaking is a great strategy that a lot of groups are embracing and making use of, and we want to connect it to a larger agenda around climate resilience in this particular case. A little bit about the terminology we're using, and again, some of these things I'm saying now are repeating what you'll see in the RFP, and I just want to highlight them and familiarize you with them and maybe spark some questions you may have. So I'm going to read through some of this material, but a lot of it is also available and repeated in the RFP, and there are links on the side of the RFP that send you to further information if you're interested. So resilience is about building the capacity for individuals, households, communities, and regions to adapt to changing conditions and to maintain and regain their functionality and really their vitality in the face of stresses and disturbances. According to the Stockholm Institute on Resilience, there's a real focus on not only being able to bounce back from a challenge, but to bounce forward, and even to take these kinds of challenges as an opportunity for innovation. Placemaking is the intentional integration of art, culture, creativity, and design in comprehensive community development. And many of you may be familiar with a lot of creative placemaking funders. ArtPlace and NEA have been doing a really amazing job of funding this kind of work. At Enterprise, we really believe that creative placemaking strategies that emphasize cultural expression and broad participation can truly enhance the social fabric and physical character of communities. I'm going to take a moment to walk through some of the highlights of this grant program and of the RFP specifically. So as I mentioned, this Cultural Resilience Grant Program will support 5 communities across the country to incorporate culture and climate resilience as mental imperatives in a project. And it will support organizations to use creative placemaking as a tool to engage residents and to build social cohesion in a project that addresses climate resilience, and it may be at the building or the neighborhood scale. I've highlighted some of these program elements, but you can also refer to the RFP and to the appendix in particular for a lot of extra details, particularly on the eligibility, geography, and the budget. So of course, welcome to ask questions on this call or reach out to us by email. So $100,000 per grantee. The period of performance will begin in June and it will go for a year. We're looking, if you've applied for Section 4 funding from Enterprise or other organizations in the past, we are looking for Section 4 eligible applicants because some of the funding provided for this grant is Section funding and it's also matched with private funding. Geographies are our Enterprise local markets, and these are not an eligibility category. Anybody is eligible under the funding requirements. Any nonprofit nationwide is eligible, but we are really prioritizing these target geographies so that we can make sure to advance the agenda of our local market offices as well. So if you have questions or concerns about that, you can always reach out to us and we can kind of take a look at your specific case. Some of the projects we might fund are all bulleted little highlights and ideas in the RFP, but a few examples are community-driven cultural asset mapping as part of a neighborhood resilience plan, stormwater infrastructure with artistic, educational, public elements, a festival that initiates the formation of a neighbor-to-neighbor network. Really interested in projects that are happening at the range of scales, from the building scale to a district or neighborhood scale. We're also really interested in projects that are at various points in the timeline. So the opportunity to use creative placemaking as an outreach strategy and the beginning of a planning process is equally welcome as a proposal that suggests some implementation. Sorts of this program, in addition to receiving funding, the grantees will also receive some technical assistance in using creative placemaking strategies and addressing your climate resilience goals. We have a wonderful team in-house with a lot of expertise here, as well as we have a cultural resilience fellow who will be joining us, and Global Green is a great team that we work with who has a lot of expertise in both of these sides of the equation. We'll also participate in a peer learning cohort throughout the year. This will include regular online sessions as well as an in-person convening on October 9th through 11th at the Eco District Summit in Atlanta, Georgia. A little bit about the selection criteria, and I'll maybe elaborate on some of these, and I'll go quickly through them. But you can, of course, let us know if you have other detailed questions on these. So the program is really intended to result in improvements to the built environment that are going to lead to better results in the face of climate-related challenges, as well as improvements that build community resilience by strengthening the social fabric of the neighborhood and local community members. Online application, which you can log into through our website, and in your proposal, prospective grantees should describe how your organization and any core partners you propose to work with will incorporate culture and climate resilience project. So at the baseline, we're looking for proposals that address how the project is going to face a climate resilience challenge or need in your community, how creative placemaking strategies to shape the built environment and strengthen social fabric to address this challenge. It can be and/or. How are you going to include local residents and engage local artists, culture bearers, designers, or other creative contributors? Our proposals are going to be evaluated on how well they describe the proposed type, scope, and expected impact of the project, how well they in cultural expression, community ownership, and climate resilience for residents, how we advance inclusive solutions and equitable outcomes, need to be targeted on racial equity, gentrification, and displacement, but we do want to understand that groups are aware of that context and bringing that lens to the projects that they're proposing. Of course, demonstrating a desire and capacity for collaboration and articulating where additional expertise or assistance may be needed. So it may include identifying consultants that you'll bring on or hiring staff, both of which are eligible activities under this grant. And it could also include needs that you haven't figured out how to address, but you think maybe enterprise could help with. And we ask for this in the proposal so that we can really hit the ground running by supporting you in the best ways possible and creating a plan for how we will work with you on the TA front. I just want to say a little bit more about some tools and resources that we have available. I just want to orient you to them. Great inspiration that may be helpful to you as you develop your proposals. First of all, as I mentioned, there are several links on the sidebar of the RFP, and they guide you to more information both on climate resilience and cultural resilience and terminology and definitions, as well as some really great project examples. So I encourage you to check those out. We have a wonderful book called Made with Love, which shares 8 case studies of creative placemaking projects, and it also addresses the lessons learned and the impacts of those projects. So it's wonderful inspiration, it's got a lot of wonderful images and some real thought about impact and how those projects have been part of a larger, longer-term goals and stories. That's online, and you can see the link below. It's also available. You can order a printed copy as well. You can download a PDF, and you can order a printed copy to be sent to you. It also has an online resource center where you can find several toolkits and webinars on community engaged design and climate resilience, So I encourage you to go there and check it out. It's a really easy link to follow, enterprisecommunity.org/resources, or you can just go on our website and find the Online Resource Center, and you can find past recorded webinars as well as a lot of toolkits and a whole series of ready-to-respond tools around disaster preparedness and resilience, as well as a lot of participatory design and community engagement tools. So, quick review of the timeline. Applications are due March 31st. We'll be reviewing applications and making selection decisions in April, and then notification and grant agreements in May, and then the grant period begins in June, goes through May 2018, and we will do site visits. Our team will do site visits to each of the grantees before October, and we'll have a set of phone calls for grantees to get to each other, and then we will all come together in October, and then to participate in the Eco-District Summit, and then we'll continue to stay in touch remotely. So that's my overview, and then I'm going to ask Thomas Lee on Enterprise's team to talk a little bit about an example in Buffalo, New York. I've got two examples just queued up to just share with you work that's happened. This grant program is new, so we don't have grants that we've specifically funded under climate and cultural resilience, but some of the projects that Thomas and Tim are going to share are just great inspiration and great examples of this kind of work already happening. Do you want me to just advance the slides for you?
Also quickly, just yes, please. The example I'm going to talk about is Push Buffalo in New York. If you go to slide 21, Nella, said that originally put 15 years ago as housers, just rehabbing dilapidated old houses in the west side of Buffalo. And as you can see, the push stands for People United for Sustainable Housing. So they've some of these projects you can see solar panels on rooftop, and solar thermal and solar PV panels on the rooftop. They got into a green infrastructure because there was a real need in the city of Buffalo, because they had a real serious sewage overflow problem. Can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
They worked in an agreement with the city to help the city with that problem by turning vacant parking lots into urban gardens, rain gardens, and general space that would soak up a lot of the rainwater the stormwater overflow. They worked at a unique arrangement with the city to have the city pay for a large part of this work. Could you back one more? And part of that, they've been very successful at looking at ways to look at different lines of business to support the work that their core work. In this case, they then got into developing local greenhouses to grow the plant material that they would then use for their green infrastructure projects, as well as they use compost from the neighborhood, recycle, use growth from the local neighborhood to develop soil to support their green infrastructure projects as well. So could you advance to slide 22? Great. And then if you were to visit this neighborhood, you'd see that has done a lot to kind of leave an imprint in their neighborhood to let people know what they're working on, what they're doing, and remind people that they are working kind of on the behalf of the people in that neighborhood, and also to invite feedback and to invite participation. So in this case, if you look at the top left-hand corner, you see an old corner house that's being converted into a neighborhood laundromat, almost laundromat / art gallery. Likewise, the house on the bottom right side, that's also another corner neighborhood house / laundromat that Bush has been played a part in creating. They've created, local retail space, pop-up space for local artists. If you look at the picture on the bottom left-hand side, there's a pop-up retail space for, graffiti artists, people who are making clothing and jewelry and whatnot. And then they've taken over, if you look at the top right-hand corner, they've taken over, unused wall space to create lots of murals to, beautify and to add color to Buffalo. Buffalo can be quite dreary in the wintertime, and so these large, placemaking efforts, like these large murals, help liven up the space a little. So go forward one slide, and here they tile together with lots of local events, kitty events, big events, and in this case they had Biz Markie come in to DJ a party for them and the neighborhood, and in this they were launching a solar initiative, and the concert created a great a lot of buzz, a lot of good buzz and attention for them, and they've been able to leverage a lot of this attention to garner additional political support as well as commercial interest. So.
Great, thanks, Tom. Mm-hmm. And we're actually conducting a deeper research case study about this program, as well as one in Boston, and so we'll be releasing those case studies in March before the proposals are due, but we'll definitely share those with those who registered when they come out. And now to Tim Bevins, and have him talk a little bit about a project in Los Angeles that he was involved in.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Nella. So I'm going to very quickly run through some of our creative placemaking work here in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. This was part of our work with Sustainable Little Tokyo, and hopefully this will help give you a taste of how your work may shape up. So if you go to this is the current, this is the way that an alley in Little Tokyo looks, and I'm going to talk about this during the slide right here, the community meeting. Thank you. Okay, so many of our projects in Little Tokyo related to the Sustainable Little Tokyo event were long range and focused on complicated issues like district stormwater. And we wanted to make a more tangible expression about how Sustainable Little Tokyo could relate to everyday residents of the community, and get some feedback from them about what changes they would like to see related to sustainability in the community, make connections, and build community. So first thing we did was we hosted a series of community meetings, and we identified a centrally located alley, the one that you saw in the title slide, that people walked through daily, but it's really an unpleasant area to be, particularly at night. But people walked through it because it was the quickest way to get to offices and restaurants and food and housing. So we worked through in these community meetings a variety of iterations of what folks might like to see: lighting, shade, art, trees, and we had a couple different intentions here. One was to demonstrate the possible and kind of test the community's response. Second was to build a body of work to make a stronger case for grant applications for permanent fixes to this alley. And then third was to build community networks, so not just on event day, but also at these planning meetings, which we had several, as well as community build nights. So if we go to the next slide. Thank you. So on this slide, you can see one of our community build nights. So Global Green staff designed a bunch of elements we were going to install on the site, taking feedback from our community meetings. And, we had people come out to an empty warehouse in downtown and help us build and paint them. And we had folks from local residents. We had folks from business community, and we also had folks related to the Japanese American community in Greater Los Angeles finding out about it and coming downtown to help us paint. For the next slide, we hired a local artist to paint murals for us to span the length of that alley and liven it up and add some beauty to it. And we had over 60 feet long of murals. And the way that we did this with our artist, we asked him, how can we make this interactive? And so both to save him some time, a considerable amount of time, but also for us to go towards that third intent of ours of building community networks, we did kind of like a paint by numbers thing. So our artist painted all of all the artwork on each of the sheets of MDF plywood that we used, and put a little dab of paint into each sections. And we had folks come over for 5 nights total to help paint their panels. And then, of course, our artist touched everything up, fixed our mistakes, and added a little sparkle to it to make it special. But the point is that this was a community effort, and the folks that helped paint, all of them came out of. If we go to the next slide. We've had 2 activations so far, and we have a third that I'll talk about momentarily. But the activation, you can see the murals hung up on the right-hand side. We have some plants. We have very simple seating that we got at IKEA for not very much money. We rented some boxes. We also built some seating out of cinder blocks and 4x4s. The point here being that everything was very cheap and DIY. The object on the left, this is an important point to bring up. That's a ukulele that was put together as an interactive art project. So participants coming to the alley were invited to dip chopsticks in blue paint and then put them into this pegboard that we had installed in the shape of this ukulele. And the reason we have an ukulele up is because we programmed our site activation to coincide with an ukulele festival happening in Little Tokyo. The point being, we knew that people were going to be downtown and in the area, and so we might as well leverage that to make sure that we get the maximum amount of people coming through. Next slide. This is our second event. This one, again, we timed to coincide with an ongoing community event. This was Fandango Obon, which is a community dancing effort which mixes Japanese, Latino, and African dance cultures. And we invited them to dance through our alley and to bring people out to us. And this one was focused on more greenery. So the previous one was focused more on artwork. That was one of the things that came out of the community meeting. And the second display was, well, what about making it more of like a park, a little vest pocket park? And so we displayed what that might look like. An important thing to note in the over the left shoulder, or your right hand of the image, over the left shoulder of the woman dancing at the front, there's a turquoise object with some netting on it, and we called that our wishing object, and we had our wishing tree, and we had folks that were coming to our community event write down their wishes for that alley, as well as Little Tokyo as a whole, and we asked them to tie it onto that. So at the end of our event, we had a bunch of little toe tags with wishes for Little Tokyo and the alley in question, and we were able to use that as kind of a edge tool after the fact to help inform our next event, which will be a night market to address nighttime safety and nighttime programming in the alley, which is forthcoming later this year. And that's all. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Tim. So I would take some time to answer questions. I know people have been sending questions in, and Donna's going to help us make our way through some of them. And I can bring back up the overview or the selection criteria or any of the other slides people want to request. I'll rest on this one for now and see what questions we've gotten.
Okay, terrific. We're getting some questions in, and keep them coming. This is great. Starting off with a really easy one, which is what folks know if they can get copies of the PowerPoint. And yes, a copy of the PowerPoint presentation will be included with the archive link that's sent to all of today's participants, a copy of the recording, and a copy of the PowerPoint. On to questions about the content, and question one is, it did receive one of the grants. Is it okay to share a portion of those funds to support activities and staff of key neighborhood partners?
Yeah, I'm going to actually pass this question to Sarah Torcell and to see if there are any detailed answers that I might not give. But overall, yes, there will be a primary grantee, but if there are local partners or consultants or staff that you want to support that would be eligible. I don't know if you have more details on that, or if you want to ask a little bit more of a probing question to find out specifics that help you answer the question. Sarah?
You know, because the grants are a combination of private and federal dollars, there are some restrictions with the federal dollars. So I would say, you know, you have to keep in mind that those dollars are for capacity building for the CDC and CHODO, but there is some flexibility because these grants will be made up of private dollars. So if you have like specifics of, you know, if you email the mailbox of more specific question about that, we're happy to answer it. But Nella's right in that these funds can be used for consultants to help assist with the grant outcomes.
Okay. Excuse me. Moving on to our next question. That one can propose a project that addresses cultural resilience and not climate resilience. Please confirm.
Yeah, so really cultural resilience is the priority of this program, but we're trying to integrate it in a climate resilience context. That said, preparedness is really about preparedness for anything, and resilience is usually resilience to multiple challenges. So we are really interested in climate resilience challenges, and having this particular program to use creative placemaking and cultural resilience strategies in the context of climate resilience challenges. So as much as you can articulate those, that is really, I think, going to add strength to the proposal. But I would say the primary focus that really are trying to advance is the cultural resilience strategies. So have a conversation if you have specifics, want to run an idea by us, that's something I'm open to. You can email me and we can talk a little bit more in detail.
The next question is, will an organization with a track record of robust community planning outreach and green projects be considered eligible as a community development corporation?
Think about the CDC eligibility.
You know, these funds are for the CDCs and CHODOs. A CHODO is a designation, so you'll know if you're a CHODO. If you're questioning if you meet the definition of a CDC, I would refer to Appendix A in the RFP. It gives a list of the characteristics of a CDC, and if after looking at that, if you still have questions, I would email your organization into the mailbox, and we can vet it that way to determine if it's eligible.
A quick look and can kind of help answer that question. So I'll say if you are sure you're not a CDC and not eligible, we would encourage you to think about partnering with one and having them be the primary applicant, but you could really be a driving force in the proposal.
Question is, Great Boston is included in Appendix B, but not on the list of target geographies. Neighborhood of color in Boston receive low priority in selections?
That's where Appendix B is one to look at. So Boston is not actually technically an enterprise market, but it is one of our target geographies. So yes, a color in Boston would be a great applicant and absolutely eligible under our target geographies. I welcome you to apply.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of target geographies, next question is, if we are in Missouri, does that make us ineligible?
The target geographies are not really an eligibility factor. If only a few applied and the strongest applications were not in our target geographies, we would go ahead and fund them. I do think this is going to be competitive given the number of people who signed up for this webinar, and I think that we'll have a lot of really strong applications in our target geographies. So will end up getting priority. But it's an eligibility factor, but it is worth your consideration because the application does take time and it'll be more competitive for you if you're not in one of the target geographies. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope, exactly right.
Next question. What is the match requirement, and would in-kind contribution be considered part of the match?
Sarah,
In-kind is not an eligible match source. Unfortunately, we can't use in-kind. And for the actual requirements of match, there's not a requirement per se, but we do ask our partners to demonstrate that you can provide match, and it varies on the level. It's typically 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 level match, but it's not necessarily a requirement, so it's not a deal breaker one way or the other. If you cannot provide match, we just ask that our partners, if able, can demonstrate that they have a matching source with this grant.
You have to match 100,000. We're asking grantees. I can actually give a little. This is one of the questions I've been anticipating, and maybe people haven't had a chance to look too much at the templates yet. But this is a somewhat complicated program in that it's got both federal and private funds as sources, and so each of them comes with, the federal in particular, come with more constraints. Of course, there are certain constraints for all of it, but particular Section 4 funds have more rules around them and are the ones that require match. So we're suggesting that groups should propose a 50-50 split budget. So figure out which of your activities are eligible under Section 4 and try to get that to 50,000, and then the rest of your activities under the private funding budget. And we're hoping groups can do the best to get a 50-50 on the budget. So the 50,000 of Section 4 is what you'd be responsible for matching.
Okay. Our question is, will projects that involve composite teams that include faith-based groups, local governments, in addition to CCs, be required?
We partnership, and I wouldn't forget about local arts and cultural partners. But partnerships, I think, will be favored highly.
Question. In addition to art spaces, do projects need to include disaster preparedness activities?
To explicitly include disaster preparedness activities. I think that you should just frame what kinds of resilience challenges you're facing and addressing with the project, but specific disaster preparedness isn't necessarily required.
Okay. If a tribal nation is awarded one of the grants, what would the report requirements be if sensitive information, in other words, traditional knowledge, be?
Answer, John?
The requirements for all the grants would be the same. So we could deal with the sensitive information on a case-by-case basis, but the reporting requirements will be the same for all the grants, and that's, basically if you've ever received a section grant from us before or any grant from us, there's usually a progress report that's required. And there will be a financial assessment component because these are federal dollars. So, there is some sensitive information that will be exchanged, but we can develop a way to get that information exchanged.
That question, you can absolutely reach out to us. I'll actually go back to the slide that has the contact info on it.
Okay, question is a two-parter. Is the acquisition costs for housing allowed, and how much is allowed for operating expense?
Sarah?
In the RFP, you'll see sort of the breakout of eligible expenses with the federal dollars and with the private. So land acquisition is definitely not eligible with our federal funds. And I don't think, Nella, unless you have a certain cap on operating expenses, I don't believe we're looking at this as you can only budget a certain amount for operating expenses. I don't anticipate a limit for the operating expenses, but land acquisition is definitely not with federal dollars.
Okay. Let's see. I have a question regarding the designation of eligible rural areas. We have a project in Yakima, Washington that we believe would be a good fit. The designation for our rural area that I saw looked like it was limited to the Puget Sound area. Could you clarify?
Yeah, if you have any questions about if a project is eligible as a rural program, I would look at the geographies and look at, there's a definition, and then you can also, there's a link, so you put in your project zip to confirm its eligibility. I'm not sure if you've done that already and still are questioning whether or not you're eligible, then you can shoot us an email, but that's what I would put your project zip in that link, and it shows up pink. That means it's in an urban area and not eligible under the rural definition.
I would, just to clarify the target geographies, that the urban geographies are all of those ones listed in Annex B with all of the details of, and then the rural Native American are nationwide, and it's just about having that rural designation, which is based on population as well as proximity to larger population centers. So as Sarah said, you can follow the link, but just so that you're not confused that if in a rural context or if you're a Native American group, you'd have to be constrained by all those other geographic details.
And our next question is, could you reiterate what the matching requirements are for the grant?
For you.
A matching requirement per se, but we are asking our partners to match the federal portion of the grant that you will receive. So as Nella said earlier, if $100,000 grant, $50,000 for federal and $50,000 for private, we would ask that you match the $50,000. The matching level varies. Typically it's 3-to-1, sometimes 4-to-1, but it's not a requirement per se. More, we're just asking our partners, if you're able to provide match, that you do so. And the amendments are, with private dollars. So you can't match federal dollars with federal dollars. We ask that the match come from private source.
And my with match has been that it's a little bit confusing. Try to help you understand, but you shouldn't consider it a deal breaker in your application process, and we'll work with you during the grant agreement process to make sure everything is really clear, and we have a process in place for keeping track of that. So it's good to inform yourself and to get acquainted with it, but it doesn't need to be a deal breaker for your proposal. And we'll help navigate it when the time comes that you become a grantee.
Okay. Question, can you please clarify the difference between applying in conjunction with a specific partner, like a local arts organization, as opposed to doing an RFP for a consultant?
Sarah, do you have thoughts on that? I feel like by just saying that many organizations that we know are doing this have already got existing partners that they work with or know that they want to work with and have an existing engagement with. If you have an opportunity to do an RFP and select a consultant or a partner, like an artist, to work on a project, we encourage that. But if there are justifications for why they would be a partner, then those are totally legitimate and we honor them. And it can be on a case-by-case basis. And Sarah, I would ask you to just add if there's anything else you would think might guide that better.
Yeah, if the question is about the procurement of the consultants, then, as Nella said, it can sort of be on a case-by-case basis, but we definitely have the expectation that consultants are selected via an open competitive process. Understand that that's not the case in every situation, and that sometimes consultants are selected outside of a process. But I think the question, Nella, was more, what's the difference between partnering with a local arts organization versus a consultant?
Yeah. And what's the requirement around having an RFP process to engage someone? I mean, I think if you've identified local partners you want to work with and you are proposing this together, you certainly don't need to go through an RFP for that. And then if you're engaging them after the proposal is submitted and once the grant is in play, then it's more likely that we would expect the RFP process. But again, if there's justification, particularly because it's an existing consultant that you've been working with or an existing partner you already have a flow of work with, and you want to just add a new scope of work to work with, and that's the kind of thing that would not require a separate RFP if you have justification like that.
Yeah, sort of evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. But ideally, when you're procuring a consultant, it's an open and competitive process.
Okay, next question. Are cultural organizations that are not formally organized as a 501c3 eligible to apply?
UC. And I would say if you are a grassroots cultural organization, we wish we could fund you, but you should find a great partner who really benefit from everything you can bring. Local CDCs often have limited capacity and would love to have a grassroots partner who can help them do some of this kind of work. So if you have some of those partners in mind, I would suggest working through that kind of partnership for this kind of grant. The CD eligibility is going to be a requirement. I'll say that if you're interested and you want to know about more opportunities if you're not eligible for this particular one, we will have our collaborative action grants again coming in the spring, and we'll probably do a round that opens sooner than this grant application closes, but we'll do another round that opens after this grant application closes and after our notifications. So whether you want to apply right in the early spring, it'll open in March, or if you want to find out if you don't get this grant, the collaborative action grants are $5,000 grants, so much smaller, of course. They're mini grants for creative thinking, and they have fewer eligibility requirements. And a grassroots organization might get eligible grantee for kind of activity. So you can stay tuned for those. They'll come soon.
Consultants and their selection process need to meet all the Section 4 requirements to be included in the grant budget?
If you budgeted the consultants in the example budget with private versus public and federal, then if you budget them under the federal, then yes, they have to meet the Section 4 requirements.
Oh. Should the project connect to previously funded enterprise projects or organizations in the community? If yes, where can we find that information?
I totally understand the question, but I would say no, actually. It's not necessary to build upon existing projects that Enterprise has funded. Of course, we love to continue to double down on investments we've made, but we also really love to bring new partners into the fold and support new work. So our local market staff will take a look at the proposal and help us with the selection process so that we're definitely advancing their priorities. But they also kind of find a nice balance between supporting existing partners and find new partners who are doing great work. My question, if it didn't, can enter another question or send an email.
Okay. Give an example of climate resilience linked to cultural resilience or vice versa.
Yeah, the push buffalo example is a great one. Looking a lot at stormwater issues, and I feel like there are a lot of good examples around stormwater, installing rain barrels or stormwater infrastructure, stormwater gardens, other kinds of like flood mitigation infrastructure that has cultural or cultural elements, some built elements that are artistic and also build awareness. So those kinds of examples are out there. There's a lot of community gardening examples as well that both deal with stuff, but also with being food security in a neighborhood, so local food security issues. And climate resilience, you can look at anything that reduces carbon emissions as building climate resilience as well, and being an important part of climate, mitigating climate change. So, we're not super prescriptive about that aspect of it. Tim, do you have any examples that pop to mind that you would want to share just to give people a good sense of what we're thinking?
Off the top of my head, a specific example. The spectrum is pretty wide, though.
Like a word about mapping and that kind of connection between cultural and climate resilience opportunity through an asset mapping project.
Okay, thank you. We so the Sustainable Little Tokyo project that I showed months ago or so, that all came from an asset mapping and kind of take stake of the neighborhood and some things that we had available to us at the time. So we first looked at larger moves like district scale work, and then we kind of a year of working on that, and then we sat down and said, okay, well, what can we make moves on in the near term? And we identified a couple different sites and a couple different strengths and weaknesses of each of them before deciding to move on our particular site.
There's, like Tim's saying, there have been a few examples where there's like a long-term district scale infrastructure project or like a solar utility, and that there are a lot of interim opportunities to engage residents around those sites and around that installation to build both awareness and social cohesion, as well as to help with installation and sometimes also some specific placemaking projects that highlight or draw awareness to those kinds of installations. Yeah, just go ahead.
Well, just what those examples that Mel just brought up, those are very visible, very very prominent features that once they get developed become part of the community, and so they become kind of part infused into the local culture of that particular neighborhood. To see how one reinforces the other.
And I was just going to say that we used the event where we had people coming out. The stated goal or the volunteers that we had from Sustainable Little Tokyo were talking to other folks about what are other areas in Little Tokyo that you have identified as problem areas. What would you like to see there? These are some of the things that we're thinking about. Does that sound right? Does that sound off mark? So we use it as kind of a crew thing of our asset mapping that mostly was done by a smaller team.
Some of the projects that were researched in Japan were, after disaster, the realization that community meeting spaces were really important and places where everybody felt like they knew they could go and they felt comfortable going. And so then there were some projects that did those kinds of spaces with a lot of community ownership.
Okay, we'll see if we can fit a few more questions in. Are organizations or communities located on territories of the United States eligible?
Sarah?
I think maybe if they emailed us a specific or area where they are. I mean, some may qualify under the rural geography, but I think we just need to know where we're talking about exactly.
Okay. Let's see. Appendix C states that enterprise generally does not fund construction costs. Can you clarify? Does that mean these funds can't be used for hard costs?
Yeah, so sort of the breakout that Nella was talking about earlier versus the private versus the federal funds. And so with the federal funds, we do not use those for construction. So for private, if your proposal is going to include construction costs or anything pertaining to that, you should include those under the private budget, but we will not really allow those with the federal dollars.
Oh. Will funds be dispersed as lump sum initial disbursement or as refunds after we pay it for expenses?
Sarah? Either will be cost reimbursable grants.
Okay. Let's see. We have more here. When talking about reducing carbon emissions, would TD meet that expectation?
Yeah. I think you have to write in your proposal a little bit of the framing of your resilience challenge in your community and how this is addressing it. But I think absolutely transit-oriented development is a great example of reducing emissions, carbon emissions.
Okay. Let's see. Can funds be used to rehab an existing and owned site?
Can you address that one?
Can funds be used to rehab an existing and owned site? Owned by the applicant? I'm not sure, but I mean, it sounds like is eligible. Yeah, but depending on what the costs are for when you're talking about rehab, whether it might fit under private, might fit under federal, depending on what the use is. But in general, it sounds like it's an eligible activity.
Okay. We're one to the top of the hour. Just a reminder, there are plenty of questions here that unfortunately we haven't gotten to yet, but they are not forgotten. I will make sure that copies of your questions along with your email address will be sent to our presenters today so they can respond to them offline. Again, so not to worry, your questions will still be forwarded to our panelists. And also
I'll
just
remind
a reminder,
you, yeah, I'll remind to send any questions as well to the email address, and we will post a blog post and some FAQs at some point, so you can also stay tuned to those. So in addition to getting your individual question answered, you might be able to see some of the other questions people are asking and just read up on our FAQs. We will do a post in the next few weeks on that.
and are now at time. Nella, did you have any wrap-up words for us?
Just say thanks, everyone, for your many questions and for your time and attention. And we look forward to connecting with you and answering more questions you have, and hopefully part together in the coming year.
Thank you very much to Nella, and with help from Sarah and Tim and Thomas, and certainly thank you to all of our attendees today. Hope to see you online at another Enterprise Live Online event.